Hello, lovely people. Welcome to Ari Talks About Music. I'm Ari, and today I'll be reviewing the new Earl Sweatshirt album, Live, Laugh, Love. Live, Laugh, Love is the fifth album from the American rapper Earl Sweatshirt, who has been building up one of the strongest discographies in abstract hip hop in recent memory. Just with this very quirky but very unique and distinctive style, having all of his albums be pretty much around only the 25-minute mark, but even with such a short amount of time for each project, he still manages to pull off so much. And even though the vast majority of his albums do pretty much just follow the same kind of format, every single one of them still manages to feel unique in its own way, with this new project Live Laugh Love being absolutely no exception. As on this album he manages to deliver some of his most fun and witty moments, as well as expanding out his sound quite a bit as well, just with the use of a huge array of instruments. The opening few seconds of this album are actually really fun and open pretty much exactly how you'd expect an Earl Sweatshirt album to, with just these very fun and very silly kind of sound effects, and of course Earl Sweatshirt's signature style of drumless kind of production. I do also really like his rapping on this track too. Again, just being very light-hearted, almost even silly in a way, and in a lot of moments is more close to talking than actual rapping, but he's kind of seemed to make that his style, which I think is really cool. And then you have the song Forge, which I do really like this one just for its unique style of instrumentation and production, just with there being so many less conventional sounds on show. I do also quite like the much more serious tone in his voice on this track, just as he manages to pull off two completely different vocal styles on two back-to-back tracks like that, but the way he does it so seamlessly I think is incredible. And there is quite a lot of that on this project, with there being very little continuity between the songs, but they still all fit together really well, and in a way that makes the album not necessarily feel messy, but more so that it's just very unpredictable, and it's just a fun little collection of songs that for whatever reason still manage to work all really well together. I really like the piano on Infatuation, just having this really cool style to it, and then mixed in with everything else and the almost completely nonsensical lyrics. On the whole, I think this is just a really good and really fun track that isn't to be taken too seriously. Gamma Need the Love, I think, is a solid enough song, however, given how incredible the surrounding tracks are with them all being so fun and memorable and quirky, I think that this one just doesn't stand out quite as much. I do quite like Earl's very deadpan tone in his voice, which I think is something that's used quite well on this song. However, I think that that does somewhat contribute to the song standing out a lot less, just with how much less emotive he sounds, just with the vocal style having a lot more of an emphasis on being quite monotonous. Well Done has this really cool, very lo-fi kind of production style, and I absolutely love the very low-pitched bass on the track too. Then you do again have that very monotonous and deadpan kind of tone in his voice. However, on this track his voice also takes on a much more sarcastic tone, which I think just makes it that little bit more interesting. Live is simply put just another very fun and quirky song. I do really like the way that the tone just completely changes halfway through, with the first half just being much more consistent and having this big emphasis on just being very relaxing, but I then really like the very abrupt switch into the second half, which just has a very chaotic and unpredictable nature. And so overall I just really love the structure of this song more than anything, as it only further continues to make the album feel more and more dense. I do really like the brass instrument arrangements on Static that just kind of give it this orchestral kind of edge, and the rapping on top of that I think is also really fun. It almost does kind of feel like the rapping and the instrumentation on this track almost weren't meant for each other, with them being two completely different and they easily could be from two separate songs. However, Earl Sweatshirt just has this kind of style where he can make that kind of thing work, and especially on an album like this that doesn't really have any particularly consistent theme, I think it just works so well to throw in all of these random things like that, and again it just makes the album feel so much more fun. Crisco once again is just another really fun track. You have that drumless production that I really like, and while it's not anything that the album hasn't really shown us already, it's still just a solid track that fits in really well, and of course it still just has that signature Earl Sweatshirt kind of flair. Tourmaline does have, I think, some really cool unconventional instrumentation, and I also quite like Earl's approach to his rapping here as well, just with that very stream of consciousness type of style, with there being quite a bit of rambling, but in a way that he manages to make really fun and unique. But I do think that his vocal delivery on this track, mixed in with the very consistent and smooth production, just works really well, and ultimately I think makes this one of the strongest but still one of the most fun tracks on the project. Heavy Metal, aka Ejectocito, almost feels like it's trying to go for a jazz rap type of sound, but I think that it just doesn't quite commit enough to that style, and then ultimately ends up coming across as messy more than anything, and not really in a way that adds to the album's atmosphere. And I think that it just ends up trying to blend jazz rap with Earl Sweatshirt's usual style, which as well as I think that could work, this song just doesn't quite manage it, I don't think. And then Exhaust, I think, is overall a pretty strong closing track. It does end quite abruptly, but I think for an album of this kind of style, that's exactly how you would want it to end. Just given how quirky and at times messy this album can be, and not in a bad way, I think quite a harsh ending like this actually works very well. I'd also really like the very fuzzy approach to the production on this track, as well as Earl's, again, very rambling kind of vocal style, which I do overall find to be very entertaining to to listen to, as he just goes on about whatever random stuff he thinks of. And so I definitely do find this to be one of Earl Sweatshirt's strongest albums so far, in my opinion, just as he delivers some of his most fun and unique moments. And just like pretty much all of his projects before this, I just love how he's able to take a seemingly completely random collection of songs that on the surface have nothing in common and turn them into a project that, while very messy, actually still manages to work really well, which is something that I think that he really does just manage to do better than anyone. And so with all of that being said, this album is going to get an 8 out of 10 from me. Thank you so much for watching this review. Please be sure to listen to this album yourself and tell me your thoughts below. Please leave a like if you liked the video, and please leave a dislike if you didn't like the video, and remember to stay hydrated.